very warm good evening to one and all present here. On behalf of Leadership Lecture Series, I invite you all for today's talk by Jean-Francois Noubel on the topic of From Homo Sapiens to Holo Sapiens, Post-Monetary Technologies to Enable Collective Intelligence. For the past 20 years, J.F. Noubel has worked in the field of collective intelligence and the evolution of our species. He has traveled the world to give lectures and advices to global leaders. He has also chosen to live an experimental life that fuels and inspires a lot of his current research. The most consistent R&D work that he has done has been in post-monetary technologies. He is a founding member of the team that developed the Holochain peer-to-peer applications platform that solves all the limitations to the current blockchain technology as it operates from a completely different paradigm to maintain the integrity of the system. As Holochain consumes little energy and requires no mining, it democratizes the rise of smart contracts to run distributed autonomous living systems. Like many of his peers, JF believes that India has a huge potential for fostering this next economy, but it's just because of its socio-political context and because it concentrates on its highly skilled individuals and visionaries who understand the lead India could take at a time when many other superpowers are accelerating backwards. With no ado, I would be inviting the speaker of the day to address us.
Well, I feel extremely honored to stand here because I have mostly operated in many parts of the world in what I do, which I'll share with you. And for the first time, standing in front of you, bright, beautiful human beings in this beautiful university campus, I feel really, really touched and blessed by that. I feel really privileged by this. So to give you a little more information about what I do, for the past 20 years, I have worked in a field called collective intelligence. Collective intelligence, you can understand that in two ways. First, living systems. You can't have life without collective intelligence. Yeah, you can't have life without collective intelligence. A flock of birds, an ant colony, cells in our body, a sports team, a classroom, a multinational, a nation state, regardless whether we look in the animal world or the human world, life could not exist without beings, cells, bacteria, ants, or human beings operating together. And, by the way, building economies together. You have an economy in an ant colony. You have an economy in our bodies. That means cells exchanging wealth, but not only exchanging as we usually think of economy, always exchange, but also creating wealth, also giving away wealth. And I'll come back to this. So collective intelligence, you can see it as a property of life, and it has turned recently into a research field. Something that tries to understand why and when you put two individuals, two bacteria, two ants, or millions of them together, why a whole may emerge. Something called a body, something called a sports team, something called an ant colony, something called a nation, things like that have a cohesion, a coherence as a whole that can self-reflect onto itself and solve very complex problems. And when I use the word intelligence, don't confuse intelligence with mental or abstract intelligence the way we humans use it. Ant colonies can solve amazing problems in their own way. If I just take this with my arm here, I didn't use mental intelligence, but look all the struggles we have in artificial intelligence just to try to do this with a robot. I don't need to think about how my fingers will open and do the gesture and take the object here. It already does very complex kinesthetic, forms of intelligence without the rational or mental rational kind of intelligence. So collective intelligence tries to understand those things. And when I started, really went in this full journey in the early 2000s, I also wanted to explore money. Because I had this question. How can we maximize collective intelligence if people need to compete against one another for their scarce money? So on the one hand, we have convergent forces where we do want to collaborate, we do want to share, we do want communion, we do want to love each other, but at the other hand, someday in the end of the month, we have to fight for the salary. We have to fight for the budget. We have to fight for our life against others because we need our share in the scarce system called the monetary system. So with this question, then the next question came up. Can we then build human beings, can we build better systems than money? We've used something called money since the invention of the writing. Actually, it kind of came together. If you could write something, then we could write a quantity of something on a coin, or use shells, or on a piece of paper, or as bits. It doesn't matter. We would write on some support some quantities of something that would represent something called money. And we've used that form for 5,000 years now. Can we do better than this? Now, as someone observing very closely the evolution of our species, you know, everyone here in this room, you know that our species evolves just right now. Every day, through the internet, we see the rise of new social species that we have never seen before. They don't have a logo, they don't have headquarters, they may even not have a name, but everywhere you can take any question as seen from the old paradigm, you know, education, transportation, healthcare, energy, and all those things, and you have them treated in the old way, the pyramidal collective intelligence world, but you have also them treated in the new way through holomidal distributed forms of collective intelligence. That means people distributed across the internet who think about, you know, the next generation of solar energy, the next form of education, the next forms of consciousness, the next form of intelligence, the next form of health, and all these things. So we see the rise of a new ecosystem of social species growing on the old one, with a, you know, a love-hate story, as we know. The love-hate story, you know, the love story, yes, of course we need the internet. We need to have more horizontal distributed organizations. We can't have centralized powers anymore, not because of ideology, but just because they don't work so well in complexity. So we need distributed powers, but distributed powers, any kind of ideology or technology that provides distribution of power, well, scares the shit out of the old power, right? It becomes very disruptive. It changes our mindset, not just outside in the world, but also inside our psychology, our inner self, inner subjective self. So I've worked on these questions for quite a long time, and not just in the external design. I will come back to the external design. We'll mostly today spoke about the external design, but I want to say also a word about the internal design. You see, we know that if we want to evolve, we can talk a lot about collective evolution, but we also know that it has to go as inner evolution. And most spiritual traditions have addressed this. Learn how to meditate, to not become your thoughts or your emotions, take some distance, become the viewer, the witness of yourself rather than the first degree. Don't buy into things. Get rid of all the old transgenerational contracts you may have, all the stuff that we have here in our way, our, you know, defense mechanisms and all these things. We can learn to get free from them, to clear the space, and then to feel better, to feel more creative, to feel more free, to feel better in our relationships and so on. However, I've noticed that you can take 10 people who have made amazing personal development. They meditate, they've learned nonviolent techniques, they open the space to the others, they became compassionate, and you take 10 people like this and you put them in the same room, and together they will keep reproducing the same old world. Why? Well, because we have not just the personal aspect in evolution, we also have the transpersonal side. The transpersonal side means the things that flow in me, like culture, language, social codes, the way I eat, the way I relate to the world, my thinking system. Well, all these things don't belong to me. They belong to we. They don't belong to me, they belong to us. Let me take an example. Language. Well, language doesn't belong to me, but any language in the world operates as a construct of old forms of consciousness. The way it maps reality comes from 50,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 20 years ago, and today, but not tomorrow. I'll give you a practical example of how I hacked myself, because I want to share with you the idea of hacking ourselves. You know, go hack yourself. The idea of take what you have as a culture, as social codes, as technology, as, you know, material wealth, and so on, and hack it in order to evolve the collective, to evolve the we. So let me go back to the language example. I decided that in French or in English, I would evolve those two languages that I speak every day. Now, I don't speak to you in English. I speak to you in something called E prime. Have you heard about that? E prime. E for English, and prime for a derivative of English. No? Okay. So that made a big, huge change in the way I speak English. Have you noticed something, apart from my French accent and, and some common mistakes that the French do? Any big change? Ta-da! Okay, I don't use the verb to be. I've removed the verb to be from my language as a way to hack myself. So why would I do that? Well, I do that, let's say, if I say, Mumbai is a noisy city. The French are not so nice. Robert is shy, or is not, whatever, it doesn't matter. Well, when I say is, or are, or isn't, or are not, I impose a reality onto you. It is this way. You have no choice. If I say Robert is shy, then Robert is shy. It has nothing to do with me. It just has to do something with an absolute reality for which you have no choice of. It is just the way I say it is, right? So first consequence, I create what we call the daily ordinary violence. That means by pushing some kind of reality onto others. And then it also has a consequence onto me. Because in my own narrative, I don't see myself as the producer of my own experiences. If I say I have met Robert yesterday, I found him shy, I think that, I believe that, I have the emotion that, all these things, then I speak from the I perspective, I become responsible for my own emotions, my own perspective, my own thinking, and I can just share it with you but not impose it to you because you may have a different perspective. So you see, sorry, I made a kind of little detour in an unexpected way talking about language, but how hacking ourselves, not just outside but also inside, hacking the culture as also can offer very important leverages. And one of the things that I've worked so deeply, so passionately for all these years goes into what we call the post-monetary world. And before I go into this, I'd like to talk a little bit about collective intelligence. Let me come back a little bit into this. Maybe I should put a couple of slides here. Yes. Okay. Today we live in mostly in a form of collective intelligence that we call pyramidal collective intelligence, just like here. Okay? Any kind of medium or big size organization, a company, an army, an administration, a government, a religion, you name it, when it becomes big, we don't know how to do other than this. And it has a name. In the world, in the discipline of collective intelligence, we call it pyramidal collective intelligence. As opposed to an older form of collective intelligence that we call original collective intelligence. So if we have a company here, well, here, for instance, you would have the executive committee, okay? In original form of collective intelligence, that means a small group of people making decisions together, seeing each other every day in a small team, just like a family, just like a group of friends, just like tribes, you know, or a village. Small community, original collective intelligence. Big community, then humanity evolved in this direction, building what we call pyramidal collective intelligence. And it operates not just externally like on this chart, it also operates internally. The way we represent ourselves reality, why will we always build those things without thinking about it, comes because we have some memes, some cultural constructs that each time we want to do something big, we will go there without even thinking about it. Because of culture, because of language, because of social code, because of food, and mostly because of money. Let me talk a little bit about that, so you will understand where we go now. This kind of pyramidal collective intelligence, you will recognize it with 4 important aspects. Let me name them here. Yeah. First, well, we know it. You all know it, centralized power. It operates, the big decisions come from a center. people in charge of the big decisions. Second, you have labor division. Yeah, once you've taken decision, then you need to fraction, to divide the work in smaller and smaller and smaller tasks, so that one human being can take it one at a time. And then you have a chain of command. Once you've made the decisions at the top, well, you need people to apply those things. That means highly trained people, because chains of command can only work with predictable people. Predictable people takes lots and lots and lots of training. It takes years and years and years of school that would teach people how to become predictable, so they can operate in those big settings called pyramidal collective intelligence. I can come back later on this if you want. But the most important point that I want really to talk about today, the fourth one, that we usually don't understand very well, a scarce currency. And it has a name. It has a name called money. Now let me introduce a very important distinction here that I will always have everywhere you will hear me and everywhere you will hear about post-monetary world. The distinction between money and currency. Usually we use the same, both one or the other, like they have the same meaning, okay? In collective intelligence and what comes next, the next paradigm, the bigger paradigm, the post-monetary world, we make a very clear distinction between money and currency. Money as one game that you can design among millions and millions and millions of games. Just like the Monopoly game as one game you can design among many, many, many other games you can design. So money represents a specific form of currencies. And we can create currencies that do very different things than just money, as long as they do represent some form of wealth, as long as they do represent some flows in the living system. Current C. C, the current. Currency. As John Locke coined that a long time ago with a huge intuition there. Okay? Currency, C, the currents. Living systems, my body, your body, the woods out there, anything has currencies inside. That means something that represents the state of the wealth or the flows of the living system. That we would call it a currency. For instance, and without knowing it, you already play with lots and lots of different currencies. Let's take Amazon, for instance. It plays with two currencies. One, the one that we know, called money. Dollars, euros, rupees, whatever. The other one, a reputation currency. The numbers of stars that the seller or you as a buyer may have. And you have two currencies binding together, because the higher my reputation and the better the flows of tokens called money will happen, okay? So we already live in a world with many currencies, but we don't even know. One of them called money, rupees, euros, dollars, yen, and so on, and many others that will serve to represent, to give a trace of a flow in our living systems. Now let me get back to this pyramidal collective intelligence and get back to money. Who has played the Monopoly game? Raise your hand, just I can see. Okay, who has never played the Monopoly game? Hey, a few. Okay, all right. Well, in the Monopoly game, when you play, you start with an ideal world. Everyone has the same amount of money, right? And then you play, roll the dice, a little bit of randomness and choices, of course, you buy, you don't buy. And something will happen, something called the Pareto effect. The Pareto effect. That means the more I make money, the more I can invest, the more I invest, the more I make, the more I make, the more I invest, and so on. So the more money I make, the more I will make. The less money I have, and the less I will make, because I'll have to pay more rent to the others. So my point here, when I talk about, let me go back here. Those four things. The fourth one that I insist on, a scarce currency called money, it means that you will always see in the world of pyramidal collective intelligence a correlation between the concentration of money and the concentration of what? Power, right? Always. The distribution of power and the distribution of money works exactly the same, okay? So pyramidal collective intelligence needs this kind of currencies called money to exist. Now, we have always lived into this world. So when we say money, when we say currency, we think money. Actually, in the next world, in the next form of collective intelligence, and we'll just jump, let me just jump here because I don't have time to go there, but here, the next form of collective intelligence that comes through the internet has a new name called holomidal collective intelligence. Holomidal collective intelligence, completely distributed, no centralized top-down command and control power. However, lots of points of leadership, but very different than what we've known so far. It works very much like our brain, our neural systems, very much like this, because we have like one picture of many social networks here that you can look at, and that has a name, holomidal collective intelligence. Now, where do I want to go with this? This form of collective intelligence that just appeared a few years ago cannot work with money. If you inject money into this, you will have again and again and again concentration of power because of the Pareto effect, based, you see on what I explained about the Monopoly game, okay? So if these organizations want to become completely autonomous and operate without a centralized structure, then we need to invent a new infrastructure. And the blockchain comes in the game. In 2008, when this paper got written, the blockchain, it proved something very important, extremely important. We can design organizations without the middleman. It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't say we can design decentralized organizations. It just said we can design organizations where we don't need someone to control the rules that we have agreed on. So then they took a case that created the Bitcoin as the case, as the application case for a cryptocurrency. And they said, okay, let's do that with a currency. We can't do that with dollars or euros because these forms of currencies operate as neutral tokens, non-encrypted tokens that flow into pipes on which banks have a full centralized control. So we can't use, in our case, the blockchain protocol on conventional currency. So we need to create a cryptocurrency called the Bitcoin, okay? And the Bitcoin came as a prototype that proves that A can send an amount to B, and that we can do the addition or subtraction, depending on which side you look at, without someone controlling it, and guaranteeing that A exists, B exists, and that the contract got fulfilled, a plus or a minus, okay? Very simple. It proved that. It did not yet distribute the protocol itself in the system. Those who design the rules remain in control. When they say, oh, we have to do transfers and with pluses and minuses, we call that a rule or a contract, okay? So it does not distribute the protocol itself. It distributes in the system the validation of the protocol, but not the protocol itself. The good news about the blockchain, it showed that we can build collectives without the middleman. Very important. However, it consumes lots and lots of energy. By the way, I want to ask you a question. How many of you know very well about the blockchain? Just for me to get a sense of that. Raise your hand. Higher, because I won't bite. Okay, all right. So the blockchain really proved this thing that we don't need the middleman anymore. And that made a huge leap towards autonomous living systems. I mean, human autonomous living systems. Now we need to take it one step further, one big step further. Can we make completely autonomous living systems? What I mean by that, can we build societies? Can we build enterprises? Can we build collectives of any sort that don't need a centralized command and control? Not because I see anything bad in this, but because it has limitations. We all know those limitations. First, we know the limitation, of course, of corruption, because when people have an overview on everything, it becomes very tempting to use that. The limitation of incompetence, because if those people make the wrong decision, well, it has consequences for everyone. but also the limitation of complexity. How can you ask? Let's think about the Indian government. And I could say the same thing with the French government and any nation state in the world, regardless who got elected at the top. How can you expect from a handful of people to deal with all the complexity of the society they have in their responsibility? How can they do that? Even if you replace everyone, all the corrupted people by, honest people, you replace all the incompetent people by highly competent people, how can you expect, even in these structures, that they can deal and embrace the complexity of the world today? They don't have the broadband for that. They can't. Even with the best goodwill in the world, they can't. So the limitation of pyramidal collective intelligence, it has lots and lots of limitations. It can go one direction at a time. If a group of people decide to go there, everyone has to follow and follow the majority. And if they want to go the other way, everyone has to follow. And if someone dies at the head or disappears at the head or gets corrupted, then it may impact millions and millions of people. So they have a very poor resilience and a very poor adaptive capacities, these organizations. So the world seems to now create the internet, and now the next economy that has to come to it. Because so far, the internet has still worked and operated in the old economy. And now it starts building the next fundamental bricks. So what did we do as a collective group of researchers, developers, thinkers? Well, we've thought of these things for many, many years. And we got very happy when the blockchain came up, because it made a big prototype, a big leap towards cryptocurrencies and the post-monetary world. Yet, it did not accomplish all the steps that we need to have. Just like, the Wright brothers, they proved that that heavier than air can fly. And they built a prototype for that. They made their case. But they could not make airlines out of their prototype. No way. You can't make a global system out of just the blockchain. It won't last very, very long. So we worked on something next that we call Holochain. Holo, it has the word holo again, holistic, holomidal collective intelligence. What does it mean, this holo root? In Greek, it means the whole. It means that it embraces and the part and the whole. And Holochain, I won't go too much into details today because I don't want to go too technical. We can do that in other meetings if you want, but just kind of draw the big headlines and then we can interact all together. But basically, it provides a standard, a new set of protocols for people to design whatever agreements and whatever distributed software they want to have among one another, distributed apps. It doesn't need to go through a centralized power anymore. And with Holochain, we've created something called Holo. That means a distributed web hosting. That is you can go on an Indiegogo campaign and already buy one of these boxes, pre-purchase one of these small boxes here called Holoports that you just have to plug onto your router, and it will operate as any server on the internet, except that not a centralized server, but distributed server, a physical cloud. You see today, most of the data that we share that flows through the internet goes through the servers of Apple, Google, Amazon, and many other big, huge providers. They have their hands on the plug. They can decide. You've heard about the end of the internet neutrality recently, right? So that means they can decide, they can apply their power on these routes to decide what can flow and what shouldn't flow, and whether they should, pull off the plug or not. Not to name that they have backdoors in which, secret services and the police and governments can look at and can enter to. So what if we have a physically distributed internet, not just by software with the cloud, but also a hardware cloud? That means you can now, get those little boxes, and that will host your data, your applications, and others' application, and you have full control on your data and others' application as well, and it goes completely distributed. Now we will have a completely distributed internet. And in order to incentivize that, because we know from experience that change does not happen because of big ideas. Change happens because people have an immediate advantage to make the next move, and the next one, and the next one. Well, for those who will get those holo ports, once they will plug them in, they will get rewarded if they provide, an excess of computing power and hosting power. They will get rewarded in a cryptocurrency called Holo Fuel, and all based not on the blockchain, but on Holochain, this new standard that we designed. So this makes a huge, huge leap on innovation, because we now have at our disposal this year coming up the capacity to build collectives without the need to build centralized power. A very, very important step. I would like to stop here for a little bit and ask, because I'd rather interact with you and with your questions and feedbacks and agreements or disagreements, whatever. No disagreements. Anything you wanna share, and I can share more after that on the difference between wealth and money, wealth and money, because we also have usually a confusion about wealth and money, just like we have a confusion between currency and money, and also we have a confusion between wealth and money. But first, I'd like to stop here and ask you, how do you feel? If you have questions, feedback, anything you'd like to share. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it can be a group, smaller group relationship. But still follows the pyramidal structure. It cannot be one, but the different pyramidal structure. How do we still overcome this structure?
Well, you see something very important, because actually, you know what? The current world order loves the blockchain, because it exactly does this. You can put a policy as a power structure and have it applied without even you the need to check that it got applied because of the blockchain. So, I mean, I don't say we should not have policies, but I just say that, the blockchain doesn't go at all against the idea of centralized power. Actually, it even, saves energy for centralized powers, because they don't need to have, watchdogs to see the integrity of the policy itself. Whether we talk about, bank transfer or any kind of smart contract, a move in a chess game or a diploma at a university or whatever, we have people creating policies and then, embodying it in some kind of a blockchain or tokenization way. Well, so you said something very important. Now let's look at something like a language, like English or French or anything else, or Hindi. Well, we don't have a centralized power in control of that. You hold a part of the language, I do. Every one of us does not everything. I don't know all English, you don't know all English. But we know enough, we have enough overlapping, each of us in this room, so that we can maintain the integrity of this standard called English, or any other language we may speak together. And not just that, we can also evolve it. In this room, we can decide to even invent new words. And maybe it will only stay in this room because we need it for our work. Even, a couple or a family, they have their own words, and it stays inside the family. But sometimes, for some reason, a word or a new grammatical expression or semantic structure will become mainstream, and not because of a centralized kind of authority. So interesting to see how those living systems work, that we can have now distributed protocols as well, which means also distributed policies and not necessarily centralized policies. And the distribution makes it such that it has at the same time a mechanism that maintains it, because we need to maintain, it can't change every day. We could not change English every single day, that would not work very well. However, it has enough plasticity so that when a need shows up, it can evolve. And sometimes it can even fork, because languages have forked all the time, and not a problem. It can fork. So when what we think and what we design for the next living systems has to integrate exactly that question that you named. Thank you for asking it. Yes?
blockchain supports decentralized applications and smart contracts. How is that different from what somebody like something like Ethereum does? That you propose to decentralize to a much greater extent.
Right. Okay, so I'll go a little technical here, and we can have further conversation if we want to go deeper. But basically, Ethereum, yeah, put it one step further because they don't just do account transfer. Actually, they can make any kind of smart contract, a plus and minus, but a chess move, but also notary contracts and anything we want to invent as an agreement that we write on some kind of ledger, some kind of shared document that we agree on. Now, it still works on the blockchain, and basically the blockchain looks for consensus. And consensus to one idea that everyone should agree that every tokens, where every token stands and where every token goes. So writing those tokens in a big ledger that you have, that I have, that everyone has, okay? So we need to duplicate this token, and actually in every transaction that has different ways to look at it depending on which server worked and which other server worked or node actually worked, well, we will do the mining stuff to take one version of this and to write it as the official version among many others in a shared ledger. And it takes a huge amount of energy. The maintaining of the integrity of the data requires a huge amount of computing power. And by the way, with the illusion that an universal truth exists about this data, which actually leads to another question. I mean, about the falseness also of this thing. But basically, this consumes lots and lots of money. Why do we need one shared ledger that everyone has, and that would grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and also make the system go very, very slow, and that would consume a huge amount of money? What if whatever transaction or smart contract we use, what if we make sure that you have an integrity of your information, let's say on your own ledger, that I have integrity of my own ledger, that random notaries around will check that it has integrity on your ledger and on mine, that we gossip this information so that it has some resilience. Why do we need one central ledger for every single action made by everyone? We can perfectly maintain the integrity of a whole ecosystem of experiences, of writings, for whatever pluses and minuses, chess moves, diplomas, it doesn't matter. We can perfectly maintain the whole integrity without consensus. That means without the one official information that everyone should have. So that makes a big, big leap as opposed to a holochain as opposed to the blockchain. And I will give you the names of some websites where you can go and check if you want to really go into the nuts and bolts for these things. Yes. Yes?
As I understand blockchain, you also explain, probably the scales well.
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit? Yes.
It scales well.
Yes.
But then the throughput is actually very low. That's one of the key problems of blockchain. Now what you're suggesting is go to private ledgers.
Yes.
In some sense, there's no need for a public ledger. Probably that the integrity is somehow can be maintained with the holochain. I don't understand much about the first time I'm hearing this holochain. Is my understanding right? Is that what you're trying to propose? If that is the case, without a public ledger, a lot of these cryptocurrencies will not be really stand out because it's like having a private currency, the group of people having private currency. But then that doesn't really, make, in my opinion, much sense in terms of becoming it mainstream.
Yeah. Well, first, I don't think the blockchain, in whatever form we take it, can scale up easily. It still remains a very marginal phenomenon at the scale of humanity, and it already consumes more than 0.1% of electricity in the world. So it does not scale up.
No, I understand that.
Yeah. Okay.
What I meant by scalability is it's easy to add into the,
Right.
system.
Okay.
But then in terms of consensus, really, it suffers, and that's
Right.
where the throughput is extremely low.
Yes.
The problem still remains, and
Yeah.
that's an unsolved problem as far as
Okay.
blockchain is concerned now.
Maybe I should go with a one simple example of another form of currency called mutual credit. Have you heard about this term, mutual credit? Should I explain it? Yes? Okay. I have a few slides for that, so very easy. Let me, I'll come back to that later if you want. Integral wealth. Sorry, just jumping. Sorry. Okay. All right, mutual credit. Okay. So remember when we play the economy game through the monopoly, which mostly represents how it works in countries, the country level. You have a centralized authority that issues coins called dollars or euros or rupees or yens, doesn't matter, okay, but some coins, some granular quantity of currency called money into the ecosystem. And if people don't have this currency, then they can't exchange. If I don't have dollars or rupees or whatever, I can't buy a house or a land or a car or food, right? So I need to have some amount of that money before things can happen, okay? Now let's look at mutual credit. Let's think of a group of people here. So you have, 8 of them. I could have put 80 million or 800 million, doesn't really matter, okay? And they decide among themselves as an agreement to create their own currency. They could do that in Chennai. You could do that in the campus here, okay, whatever, okay. And they all start with a 0 on their account. So you don't have an external bank giving them some tokens to play with or some currency to play with. They all have 0. Now this person buys to the other person for an amount of 15 credits, his bicycle, for instance. And so plus 15 goes on one account and minus 15 goes on the other account, what we call the double entry accountability, okay? And now this person will buy for 8 credits, 1 hour of French class to the other person. And now you have just a sum that you can see here. So we had, now 15 circulating credits and 2 exchanges and a volume of exchange that you can check of 23 credits. And I could go on and on, people buying things, selling things to one another, and so on and so on, okay? So when we look at this, first, if we do the sum of all the accounts, what do we have as a result? 0, right? Wow, good. Good. Okay, so we have 0. Okay, did we need an external bank for people to exchange? No, right? They just go plus and minus, plus and minus, plus and minus. So in the old paradigm, you need an authority that gives you token, and if you have the tokens, then you can do the exchange. In the mutual credit, you do the exchange, and it creates the tokens. It creates actually the entries into those ledgers, a double entry ledger. Now, of course, you could ask yourself, okay, but how much, negative can someone go, or positive? Okay, maybe that person here may decide to go minus 10 million. Why not? Well, then by governance, this group could decide to say, well, no one can go above plus 1,000 or minus 1,000, and you have to breathe to give and take and give and receive and give and receive between this. Okay, simple system. But they could quickly decide, too simple of a system. It doesn't, sometimes we need a higher credit range. So something maybe based on trust. Okay, let's create a trust system. And then they could invent some algorithm where, a newcomer, someone you don't know, can only evolve between plus, let's say, 500 and minus 500. And the more that person would do some exchange, and the more trust would get built with a reputation system, and then the more credit line on plus and minus that person could have. That becomes a more sophisticated system because you have 2 currencies now. You have one for buying and selling, the mutual credit, and another one, a reputation. And what if this group of people decided that they want to include a 3rd currency because they feel sensitive to the environment? and they want to check everyone's footprint to limit the carbon impact and all those things. And let's say that if you do well with your third currency called the carbon footprint or ecological footprint, then your reputation becomes even better, and then your line of credit may become even better. And what if those people decided to even sophisticate that and decide of a tax system? So that every exchange, for instance, 10% goes to the community for infrastructure, for supporting old people, pregnant women, students, anything that they want to give support to. So you see that we have no technical limitations to do that. No technical limitations. We could do this tomorrow if we wanted to. You could do that even in the campus. You could decide, credits based on time, for instance, and you can give teaching time to some other students, and that gives you a credit that you can use to get taught by someone else, and completely improve, the mutual credit of time in the campus, for instance. You could do that, and based on reputation, and also maybe a tax system to have a fund of hours that you can give to people who may need that. So many things you can design. The only limitation of a system, if you just hard code it in some device or app, phone on app on your phone and all these things, you don't make it interoperable. It can't interact with other systems in the world. So what we designed, the Holochain thing, will work so that whoever designs those systems can interact with many, many other systems. So you see, just with this very simple example, we can design many, many other currencies. And I just remained in the old paradigm of, exchanging things. I didn't talk about gift economy. I didn't talk about other forms of economy that we can also design. Right? And we can also have interfaces where we can see, many forms of wealth, for instance, not just what we buy and sell. Gratitude, ecodiversity, time given to one another, number of participants. If those things count, they become wealth system. They become a language of wealth. We could even have, things like this on our smartphones where we can have even fancy representations of wealth. We could even go further. Imagine that, if each fish represents some form of wealth. Maybe what if this beautiful yellow fish would represent, I don't know, the biodiversity in the campus, for instance. And if you see that happy little fish, the biodiversity works well. What if this other fish here represents, I don't know, the number of happy hours that students have together, and so on. You see, when you look at something like this, you don't use only your analytical brain, the charts and numbers and all these things. You also use your right subjective brain, where you start to see relationships between those fishes and the harmony of the whole thing. It gives you much more information than just pure analytics. And we can have such information systems in the future that will represent the state of our collective based on many, many currencies that flow in the collective. And we have the technologies now to build those things. And those things will change the world very, very, very quickly. In the next few years, everything will change.